What up, Stumo Online? Pumped to be with you guys tonight, wherever you are joining us and watching. My name is Brandon Rietz, and I help lead Stumo in the campuses in the state of Oklahoma. And I am really excited to get to kick off week 1 in this new 4-week series in the meantime. I don't know how your family is dealing with the current situation and the pandemic that's taking place. My kids, when they found out there was no school, they were pumped, as I'm sure you guys were. They were also excited to start doing school at home. So they created a classroom in our dining room. It's just off to your left. And when they created school at home, they asked me, they said, "Hey, Dad, would you be our PE teacher?" Now, there's a lot involved in that request, but I was honored. So we've been doing PE 3 times a week. It's been a lot of fun. I've been pushing my kids, but we've also had a good time. But you can learn a lot about a person or about people in the requests that they make, and maybe even how they think about you. Notice what they didn't ask me. They did not ask me to be their science teacher or their math teacher or their history teacher or their English teacher. They said, no, Dad, we think your best fit, Dad, would be a PE teacher for us. It's been fun. Maybe if I wasn't in ministry, maybe that would have been my life. I have no idea, but we've had a good time. I want to ask you a question. Have you been asking yourselves what is going on? Why is this happening? Or maybe even, are we going to make it through this? Of course you have. I'm sure you've asked those questions verbatim for the past few weeks. I know that probably all of you are asking questions like this. What is going on? Why are my parents treating me like I'm 13 again? Maybe some of you have been asking, is this thing going to end by summer? Translation, should I actually try to get in shape or should I just not care and let myself go? Maybe some of you are asking this. What is going on? Why is it that I have so much time, yet I feel like I have no time to do the things I actually want or need to do? I asked a different question this week. I said, what is going on? Why do we have so many bananas? My wife, Kimber, I love her. She's amazing, but she has been trying to figure out this grocery pickup. She thought that she was ordering 6 bananas. She instead ordered 6 clusters of bananas. If you're wondering, that's 12 pounds of bananas. She got back from the store and there was 2 full Walmart bags of bananas. They filled a part of our kitchen. So this week, my family and I have been traveling to different neighbors and delivering bananas during the pandemic. I don't know how it's going to affect our image in the neighborhood, but we're doing it anyway. But then some of you might be asking more serious questions. Maybe somebody in your family or a friend that you know or a friend's family actually has acquired the coronavirus. And you're seriously asking, man, what is going on? Why is this happening? Or are we going to make it through this? How is this going to impact our family on the back end of all that has taken place? Well, tonight, we're going to look at a passage of Scripture that is going to help us see that every single one of us can persevere through this situation by having the discipline of mind to know that Jesus' presence and his promises are with us. See, what if I told you guys that God is desiring for us to stand out during a time like this? And when I say us, I mean people that follow and love Jesus, that have really committed their lives to him. What if I told you this was a time for you and I to stand out, to be people that actually are offering hope and life and peace to a world that feels like those 3 things are in incredibly short supply? Well, tonight we're going to look at a passage, and you're going to see it in Mark 4. It'll be on your screen. But what I want you to see as we look at this is that Jesus gives an invitation. And in the midst of this invitation, there are 2 keys. I want you to look for those 2 keys. But the other thing I want you to know is that Jesus gives this invitation knowing that he is inviting his disciples into a scenario that is going to have a raging storm take place. And he still gives the invitation. Hey, I want to ask you just for the next 30 seconds to not chat on the side. I want to just look at this passage of Scripture, and I want you guys to actually look for the 2 keys as we look at it. Mark chapter 4, starting in verse 35. Jesus says this, "That day when evening came, he said to his disciples, 'Let us go over to the other side.'" Did you see the 2 keys? That day when evening came, Jesus said to his disciples, "Let us go over to the other side." First, the first key is this. Jesus says, "Let us go over to the other side." Jesus says, "Fellas, I'm going to be with you. We are going to go together to the other side." The second key, he says, "To the other side." Guys, we're going to make it through this. We're going to get to the other side. Okay, you can start chatting again. And here's what I want several of you to write in the chat. I want you to write this. Jesus' presence and his promises are key. See, his presence and his promises are key. Jesus told his men, "Let us go over. My presence is with you." And then he said to the other side, his promise that they're going to get through this. He gives you and I, in the midst of this crazy storm that's going on, the same promises. He says, "I am with you." He wants us to know he's with us. And then we are going to make it through this. I'm not saying that I have that personal promise to me, and I can't tell you that you have that personal promise. But I do know this, that the church, that God's people will make it through this. And God says he doesn't want us just to be able to endure this and make it through. He wants us to actually be able to persevere and thrive in this to the point that we stand out and give a great hope and life and peace to a very doubtful and fearful world. See, what's fascinating in this passage is that his disciples very quickly forget those two keys. All they can see is the raging storm that's around them. And they fall victim to unbelief because of their situation. Does that sound familiar to you guys? See, during a time like this, it is so easy for us to allow the media, our family, our friends, our own flesh to dictate what we think, what we see, how we talk, and most importantly, what and how we believe. But Jesus says, "I want you to know that I am with you and that my promises hold true regardless of the outside situations." I want you to write this in big letters. If you've got a note card or if you've got a notebook that you're taking notes, I hope you're taking some notes. I want you to write this in huge letters right in the middle of that notebook. And I want as many people as possible to write this in the chat all at the same time. I want this to be embedded into our brains. You ready? Write this down. Discipline leads to distinction. Discipline leads to distinction. Flood the chat with "discipline leads to distinction." Write that in big letters on your notebook. I want that to be burned into our brains. Discipline leads to distinction. Here's what I mean. I don't mean discipline in the sense of let's just work hard or you need to work harder. That's how you become distinct. What I mean is the discipline of mind to constantly remember Jesus' presence and his promises. That will lead to distinction. If you and I can remind ourselves, and sometimes most importantly, remind each other, that Jesus' presence and his promise should be embedded here, we can live very, very distinct lives. I've heard it said that the first step is the hardest. I completely disagree. The first step isn't the hardest. I've got 3 kids. And all 3 of my kids, I got to watch them take their first steps. And guess what? Their first steps weren't the hardest steps. They didn't face plant on step 1. My kids had balance, they could stand. Step 1 actually wasn't that tough. You know when they face planted? It was step 2, step 4, step 5. Those were the steps that they face planted on. And the same is true of you and I. I'd be willing to bet that just last week, I believe it was last week, T-Coy gave us the TLP challenge, right? Find a time of the day to pray, determine a length of time that you'll pray, and then find out a place that you'll pray, TLP. If you actually took T-Coy up on that challenge, then I would be willing to bet that Thursday, the day after the challenge, you did it. It wasn't the first day that was the hardest. I'd also be willing to bet that come Saturday, Monday, today, these days were harder to consistently follow through on that TLP challenge. You know why? Because the first step's not the hardest. It's the next step that is the hardest. The next step. See, people that have the discipline of mind to remember the right things about who Jesus is and what he says, it's the next step. It's putting one foot in front of the next to always be a person that is devoted, deeply devoted to God. See, people that persevere have that type of discipline. I don't know how many of you are marathon runners. We all know that Tikoy is. I'm not, never will be, don't have any desire to run a marathon. But I've been reading the last month on marathon runners, more specifically on ultra marathon runners. Apparently it's the fastest growing group of people, like sport, in the world. Ultra marathon runners. An ultra marathon is something that's greater than the distance of a normal marathon, but typically it's significantly greater of a distance. But there's one specific race that has stuck out to me. And this one race is called the Big Dog's Backyard Ultra Marathon. First of all, I think the name is amazing. Big Dog's Backyard Ultra Marathon. But the idea is even cooler. The world calls it the craziest race in the world. A guy named Gary Cantrell, in his backyard in Tennessee, has created a 4.2-mile loop. And he has this ultra marathon where there is no finish. In fact, here's a picture of the finish line. As you can see there, it says, there is no finish. Because here is the race. You have to qualify and be an incredible runner to qualify. And the race is this. Every hour you have to run that 4.2-mile loop in his backyard. And you have to finish it within an hour. And whatever time you have left in that hour, you can then hydrate, you can eat, you can rest. But that at the beginning of the next hour, you have to be back at the starting line. In this race, what's very interesting is there is no second and third place. There's just a winner. Everyone else loses, and it's just who lasts the longest. The record for the longest run ever at any marathon, I believe, is a guy who won Big Dog's Backyard Ultra Marathon 2 years ago. His name is Johann Steen. Johann Steen ran 283.335 miles. And it took 67 hours and 48 minutes. 67 hours, 48 minutes, running a 4.2-mile loop. 283 miles. I can't imagine. See, he outlasted everyone else. And what every marathon and especially ultra marathon runner will tell you, as I've been reading about him, is that it's not necessarily just a physical feat. It is a mind game. It's a mental battle. In fact, one marathon runner says this. Says you can't tell yourself it's you versus someone else. It's just you versus you. See, if I were to ask you, what is the biggest hindrance to you persevering in your faith, being deeply devoted and remembering Jesus' presence and his promises? Some of you might say, oh, coronavirus. Some of you might say, man, it's my family or my friends or some of the issues that are swirling around the nation. Some of you might say it's not enough time or not enough money. And all of those may be factors, but that's not the biggest hindrance. You know what the biggest hindrance is? You and me. You are your biggest problem. John Maxwell, an author that I really enjoy reading, says this: most people accept their lives. They don't lead their lives. There are so many people right now that are just accepting their life. And Jesus wants you and I to be distinct, to stand out, and to still lead our lives and lead others' lives in the midst of this difficult storm we're going through. Well, if you read back into the passage, what's amazing is that this storm is horrible, and it's starting to swamp their boat. The waves and the wind is coming over the sides of their boat. And the men start to doubt. They forget. They forget who is with them, and they forget what he said. They go, and you know where Jesus is during the storm? He's asleep. Jesus is at perfect peace in the midst of a crazy storm. He is not next to them, telling them, guys, it'll be okay. He says, I've already told you I'm with you and it's going to be okay. His men go get him and they say, Jesus, don't you care that we're going to die? Jesus wakes up. He comes out and he calms the storm. The wind and the waves die down and it's totally peaceful. And then he looks at his men. And I would have loved to have been there to see the tone. I don't know what tone he said this, but I like to think that he says it very caring. He says to his men, why are you so afraid? Do you still not believe? Do you still lack faith? I want to ask us a similar question tonight. Why are we so afraid? Why are we doubting? Do we still not believe? Do we still not recognize that Jesus' presence and his promises hold true, even in a situation like we're enduring now? I don't know where you are, and I don't know the situations and the doubt and the fear and the confusion that's going on in your heads. But I can imagine the doubt and the difficulty and the fear that were in the disciples' lives in that boat. I can imagine and see them looking all around them, and all they can see is the storm. And what Jesus wanted them to remember was that he was with them, and that he was the one capable of calming the storm. Do you believe that? Here's what I want to challenge you to do. I want to challenge you. I've challenged my entire region to do this for this entire month. I just want to challenge you guys to do this for the next 7 days until the next Stumo Online. I want to challenge you to get on your knees every day for the next 7 days. You can make it a part of your TLP. I want to challenge you to get on your knees each day and surrender yourself to God and to acknowledge his presence and his promises in your life. I want you to spend time on your knees recognizing his authority and recognizing that he is still in control, and that because of that, we can be distinct, we can stand firm, we can be certain, because our certainty isn't in a situation or in a circumstance. Our certainty is in a person, and his name is Jesus. And so many people need to see others that deeply depend and are devoted and have faith in him. Discipline leads to distinction. Thanks so much for joining us tonight.